Hello, I'm Hyunjun. I'm really glad to be here. I want to talk about the issue, something's different in China. What's in your mind with the empty paper? Whatever you think, it doesn't really matter if you're not Chinese. Recently in China, the protest against a particular Chinese government policy has occurred simultaneously. One of the major characteristics of the protest is the participants bring a piece of empty paper, and that's the reason why this protest is called as White Paper Revolution. Then why they come up with the empty paper? What's the hidden intention? To understand it, we should find out what was happened in China firstly. Since the COVID-19 outbreak, every single health organization, including WHO and health ministry of each nation, try to figure out what's the intermediary host of COVID-19 and where's the origin. Through the scientific research for the distribution of disease, WHO provisionally expected COVID-19 had mainly spread by bats, and considering the early site of infection is Hubei seafood market may broken out in China. Of course, many countries damaged by pandemic started to discharge the Chinese government's obligation and ask for a tremendous amount of compensation. Under these circumstances, the Chinese government had to pay great attention to the COVID-19 infection status in China to relieve the burden by countries around the world. This led the Chinese government to implement the zero-COVID policy. But as its name suggests, this policy inevitably involves a strong city-level lockdown. Due to the policy, with only a small number of infected cases, the entire city had blocked. Residents were very tired, and in some cases, they were unable to procure daily necessities for their homes and quarantine facilities. In this situation, 10 residents were killed in a fire in an apartment in the Uyghur area of Western China, triggered public opinion that the lockdown policy prevented them from escaping. As a result, the so-called White Paper Revolution spread throughout China. For the last few weeks, massive demonstrations took place in Chinese metropolitans such as Beijing, the capital city of China, as well as Shanghai, Guangzhou, Nanjing, and Wuhan. Protesters initially complained of economic difficulties caused by the lockdown, but some demonstration led to criticism of the Chinese Communist Party and its leader Xi Jinping's dictatorship. They condemned the Chinese Communist Party's censorship against the media and expressed their meaning that everyone knew about the Communist Party's dictatorship in empty paper. This demonstration means that citizens under the dictatorship voluntarily fought for their economic freedom. In addition, the demonstration is politically significant as Xi has won 3 consecutive terms and established a firm dictatorship. There's other reason why this situation is particular. The fact that China is very strongly suppressing the democratic movements. Of course, this is not the first time for a massive demonstration in China. There were once in the early 1950s, once in the late 1970s, and the most well-known democratization movements in the late 1980s. Among them, the second Tiananmen Square incident in 1989 was extremely violent. Against the Chinese Communist Party, intellectuals and college students led the demonstration, and people motivated by the protest engaged, and finally became a huge-scale demonstration. Before the martial law was issued, the moderates of Communist Party tried to disperse the crowd but failed to completely disperse them. When martial infantry and tanks arrived at Tiananmen Square, the tragedy began. Actually, martial forces were made up of soldiers far away from Beijing who would not be reluctant to shoot people in Beijing. Even martial forces didn't know who they were facing with until they were deployed into the square. When the protesters left in the square until the end, were killed by martial forces. Based on this history, China is one of the single-party dictatorship nations nowadays. With Xi Jinping's 3rd consecutive term, China's political system is becoming more solid than ever. Xi also coordinates the thoughts and knowledge of Chinese through strong social media censorship and media control. However, it's getting easier to access the information across the border through the network. Chinese people watched the crowd without masks at the Qatar World Cup and will realize the zero-COVID world only exists in China. There is a Korean proverb that says, "You can't cover the sun with your hands." No matter how much the Chinese government keeps their people away from the outside, they won't accomplish in the end. Just like sunlight, they'll see something and realize their reality. Thank you for listening.